I'm 30 years old, and this story took place when I was 13. My mother was a single mom, and she had to work 2 jobs. She worked at a grocery store in the morning and a bar at night. So I was home alone a lot, but it was okay because I was used to it. I could cook myself some dinner and walk back and forth to school. I was a pretty responsible kid for my age. One night, I was watching TV while eating ice cream, and someone knocked at the front door. I was wondering who it could be, as my friends never came out this late and my mom would always use her key to get in. I opened the door, and it was a man standing there with his hands in his pockets. I said, "Hello?" He replied, "Hello, young lady. Are your parents home?" Stupidly, I said, "No. My mom isn't home right now. You have to come back tomorrow." He then said with a surprised smile on his face, "Oh, you're all alone, huh?" I said, yeah, I am." He replied with, "Okay, young lady. Have a nice night. Don't get into any trouble." He then walked away and I closed the door. He seemed friendly, but also weird at the same time. He was a little funny looking though. He was balding and had 70s style glasses on, with a mustache and bags under his eyes like he never slept. About 10 minutes passed, and there was another knock at the door. I got up to answer it, but before I opened the door, something told me to put the chain on. I don't know why, but my gut told me to do that. It was strange because we really didn't use the chain. But I'm glad I did, because as soon as I opened the door, it was pushed open, but abruptly stopped by the chain. Before I could even say or do anything, I looked through the crack of the door to see the same man again. And he said in a startled voice, Oh, hey there. I just wanted to make sure you were okay," as he stuttered. It was like he knew he failed getting inside the house and tried to play off any suspicion by speaking quickly and making it seem like he didn't just obviously try coming into the house. I said, "I'm fine, thanks," and I shut the door. At that time, I didn't really understand the situation or the dangers of what just happened. But still, I was a bit freaked out and wanted my mom to come home soon. An hour went by, and I was still thinking about what happened, so I started to watch a movie, trying to keep my mind occupied, when I heard,
"Hey, let me in quick. I gotta tell you something."
This was the scariest situation I've ever been in my life. It was the man once again. He was talking through the letterbox. I shouted, "Leave me alone." The letterbox closed. Then the man started banging on the front door, screaming, "Let me in, you little shit," while slamming the front door handle up and down trying to get in. I just stood back crying, praying he doesn't get in. He eventually gave up and left. My mom came home about 30 minutes later, just to find me crying, and I told her everything that happened. We told the police, but they never found this guy. I look back, and I think how grateful I am that I had the feeling to put the chain on the door. I hate to think what that man would have done if he had managed to get in.
This happened around the year 2011 when I was 13. One day my friend was planning on throwing a party at his place, so my older cousin drove me there. It took about 4 hours to get there, and when I finally arrived, it was around 8 p.m. A few hours later, we were having fun, but out of nowhere, I had to use the bathroom really badly. About 5 minutes had passed, and while I was in the bathroom, I heard a crunching noise coming from the woods. At first, I thought it was someone who arrived late to the party, but all of a sudden, I heard loud banging on the glass. I started to think it might be my friend just looking for me, so I told him that I was inside the bathroom. However, it wasn't my friend. It was a guy who looked like he was in his late 50s. He said that his car broke down. He then asked me to help him, but I was already paranoid about strangers. So I simply told him that I couldn't help him. He nodded his head and walked away. When I was done using the bathroom, I went back to the room where my friend was. I told him what I saw and what the man said to me. My friend looked like he just saw a ghost. Then he finally said that for almost 2 months, this man was stalking his entire family and also saw him from the bathroom window tons of times. They asked the police to check their area several times, but they couldn't help his family. When he said that, I thought he was overreacting until I heard the same banging noise now coming from the door. It was more violent now. Everybody paused what they were doing and looked at the door in shock. One guest broke the silence and said it was probably only the pizza delivery man. But my friend told me not to answer the door at all costs. I looked through the peephole, and there he was. The same guy I saw through the bathroom's window. He had a psychotic-looking face and was licking his lips nonstop. We all just stood there in silence and hoped that the man would go away. But after a few minutes, the loud noise came from the basement. The guy threw a brick at the basement's window and crawled through it. Suddenly, it sounded as if a gunshot echoed through the entire house. My friend and most of the partygoers screamed and ran out of the house. I stayed behind along with a few others. One of the older kids was trained in martial arts, so I saw him assault and attack the man until he was shot. Afterward, the man escaped and ran into the woods. The whole scene was chaotic now. An ambulance and police car arrived soon after, and fortunately, the kid that was shot survived. After a few days of intense investigation, the police went to my friend's house and told him that they caught the guy. It turns out that he was living in the woods. He also kidnapped 3 kids, but luckily they were found in time and set free. But they also found out that he had already killed a few kids already. So after that, he was condemned to death for murder. It was on August 6th. I came back home after work thinking of taking a long sleep during the weekend. As soon as I arrived home, I washed up quickly, lay down in bed, and slept right away. And the time was around 7 p.m. But when I opened my eyes for some reason, it was at 2 a.m. I was wondering why I woke up so early, since I usually fall asleep on weekends and no one can wake me up. However, I decided to drink water while I was up anyway. So I got out of my bed, went to the kitchen, and lay in bed to sleep again. Just then, it was something furry, I think, and it touched my back. No, it can't be. I used to lie on my side and sleep. I opened my eyes for a while because of the strange feeling, but soon I decided to just ignore it without much thought. However, that was not an illusion. I could feel someone kept touching my back. It seemed to be rough, and there was even something sticky about it. My heart dropped, and I slowly looked back. There was a man lying there. I was sweating like the cold sweat was coming out of all the holes in my body. I've never seen such an awful look in my life. I could see his hair turned all white. The skin all came off. His mouth and nose were all crushed that I couldn't recognize his face, and he was staring at me just like that. I opened my eyes screaming and then realized it was a dream. Because of sweating a lot, I got thirsty, so I went to the kitchen drinking some water again. I lay down thinking that was the end of the nightmare, but it wasn't. I had to go through the same situation 2 more times. In the first dream, I also got up in surprise, but the second one was different. Somehow, I was courageous and eventually talked to the person. "Why are you doing this to me?" Then he beckoned to me instead of answering, and it felt as if he were asking me to follow him. "If I follow you, you won't be in my dreams anymore?" He nodded and headed to the kitchen. So I followed him, and he pointed his finger to the refrigerator, and this time he pointed to a clear glass bottle when I opened it. He then opened his mouth and said for the first time, "I know you are thirsty. Drink it." It was just a dream. However, I was so scared that I couldn't reject it, so I ended up drinking the water in the bottle. After I finished drinking, he asked me to send him off and said that he would no longer come. Unwillingly, I opened the front door and went with him. Even though my house was an apartment, there were no elevators and stairs in my dream, and we went straight out to the yard. And it was weird that my whole body began to sweat while I was walking on the flatland while sending him off. I finally arrived at the front gate and tried to take a step forward to see him leaving, but I was clearly blocked by something, even though there was nothing in front of me. He kept beckoning, but it was no longer possible to move forward. Just then, I felt the water dripping on my head, and then I ended up waking up. As soon as I opened my eyes, my legs suddenly throbbed, and the moment I came to my senses, I was purely shocked. I was on the rooftop and kept bumping my thighs and knees on the railing that was blocking right in front of me to move forward. The rainwater woke me up, saving my life just before I was almost falling from the rooftop and killing myself. The rooftop door, which was supposed to be locked, was also open for some reason. Being terrified, I ran home without even thinking about using the elevator. I was out of breath after entering the house, so I opened the refrigerator again and started drinking water. Meanwhile, I suddenly remembered the glass bottle that he made me drink in my dream. So I checked what it was, and to my surprise, it was a whiskey which I used to drink when I couldn't sleep. And the bottle was definitely full until yesterday, but there was not a sip left. To sum up, I couldn't wake up because he made me drink that whiskey, and the reason I had a hard time walking when I sent him off was that I was actually walking toward the rooftop. If my body hadn't actually caught on the roof railing, I would have killed myself and said goodbye to the world. I knew that there were people who often had this experience out there, but I was really horrified when I literally experienced it myself.
One late night, I was walking along the path with my friend. Suddenly, I heard someone from behind us speaking quietly. "Don't look back. Don't look back. If you look back, if you do that." I stopped in amazement. There was silence for a few seconds. And behind me, I could hear something ripping and a groan of pain that I don't know whether it was an animal or a human. Being seized with fear, I clenched my teeth to stop my instinctive curiosity to look back. However, when I took a peek at my friend Ken, he who seemed couldn't resist curiosity, has been already looked back. Ken, who thought someone was fooling around, was smiling and looking around to see who it was. Although we couldn't see around it because it was dark already, he seemed to think it was no big deal. Just then, I heard someone scream, "If you look back, you are going to die." Something flew in and stuck in Ken's body, and a moment later, he fell to the ground groaning. The knife was stuck in his leg when I looked at him in extreme fear. He screamed and shouted, "Don't look back! Run!" I grabbed his arm and ran away like crazy. I heard a chasing sound from behind, but didn't have the courage to look back though. "I'm starving! Give it to me!" The man shouted, and when I glanced back, I could see him laughing, bleeding from his mouth, and following us like a mad, holding a knife in his hand. Ken, who was limping at that moment, was soon caught by him. To my surprise, he grabbed Ken's leg and tried to cut out the flesh with a knife. It was like he was cutting steak something. I kicked him as hard as I could, and he was eventually knocked out. We barely managed to escape and were able to get away from him. We hid somewhere and ended up calling the police. Soon, there was the sound of a police car. I took a look at Ken's condition, and his leg's flesh was torn apart. When I asked him what had happened, Ken then replied in pain. The moment Ken looked back, he saw a homeless man who was eating something alive raw. And that man threw the knife he was holding at Ken when he met his eyes. The police later arrested him and also found a man whose flesh had been torn apart from his entire body. It turned out that man was eaten alive. Barely breathing, he eventually died on his way to the emergency room. The victim, who was drunk, fell unconscious on the floor at the time and was eaten by a homeless man. I still can't forget Ken's deathly pale face. If I had failed to run away that day, I might be lost some part of my body too.
When I was a little girl, I was scared of sleeping alone, so I used to sleep with my mom. Eventually, I had to toughen up and sleep by myself. Well, this happened when I was in high school. I had a twin-size bed in my room and decided to leave both my door and my mom's door open. Our bodies were facing opposite directions. I couldn't sleep that night, so I turned on my MP3 player and was laying in bed, listening to music. All of a sudden, I felt a little strange, so I turned my head around, and at that moment, I froze. I saw a person's foot on my mom's body. First of all, if someone gets too nervous, it's hard to look around clearly. However, I slowly looked up, and then I saw the face of the person standing on her body. Literally, someone was standing on my mom's body. Well, it was the worst thing I've ever seen. I wanted to turn my head around again, but I couldn't. I couldn't open my mouth or even listen to music anymore. I couldn't take my eyes off his face. His mouth was stretching and getting bigger and bigger until eventually it ripped right under his ear. I could see that the inside of his mouth was all red. I wanted to wake my mom up somehow, so I gathered up enough courage as I could. "Mom!" As soon as I yelled, everything disappeared like smoke. She ran into my room, hugged me, and reassured me that everything was okay. I was leaning on her now, so that I could calm down. Soon after, I put my earphones back in and turned on my MP3 player. And that moment was really crazy and just plain scary. All of my files were gone. I had around 300 songs on the device, but all the songs were erased for no reason. I couldn't sleep at all that night and still felt bad even after waking up the next morning, so I ended up breaking my MP3 player. Well, why did my music files disappear?